So this is mainly about like record relationships and the fact that in NetSuite sometimes you can do things different ways, and sometimes it doesn't matter, but sometimes it does. And there's a better way and there's a worse way, right? So when SQL came out in, I think, the 70s, when the first paper was written, right, it's taken the world by storm because it is the model for modeling data. Because every kind of data relationship can be done in SQL. SQL is, beyond brilliant. I'm sure you guys know that. NetSuite, of course, uses SQL under the hood, if you will, but to the user, it tries to do things to make it maybe simpler, and knowing how SQL really works will help you in your design of record relationships. So there are essentially three types of relationships that are modeled in the real world in SQL. One-to-one, right? Me and my spouse, right? That's it. In Utah, maybe it's different, but normally one-to-one, right? You got one-to-many, parent to their children, and you have many-to-many. Clubs and the members of that club. One person can be part of many different clubs. One club has many different people in it, right? So those are the three relationships. And in all of them, there is the implied assumption that it can also be 1-to-0. Like even if it's one-to-many, the many might be 0. In the one-to-one, I'm not married, so that's a 0, right? But at least conceptually, it's 1-to-1. All right. So now, let's take a simple example where you have maybe a sales order and let me back up. A one-to-one. An obvious example that I won't really dig into is, let's say on a single record you have two different fields. Well, that's a one-to-one relationship, right? But that's not interesting. We're not, I'm talking about when we create records to describe more complex things. But it's an example of one-to-one just that I want you to kind of think about for centering yourself, right? On a sales order record, there's a memo field and there's a customer field. So in that sense, there's a one-to-one there. But really, when you're creating a separate record, so let's say, for example, that you need to create 50 fields on a sales order. But you don't want to create 50 custom body fields and just clog up the system. There's very good reasons not to do that. So you create a separate record, my sales order overflow record, right? And it's going to be one-to-one in your mind, right? One sales order will have these 50, you'll have one of these supplemental records. But whenever you do that, conceptually, one record or the other can have a pointer, right? The sales order can have a drop-down list that points to the supplemental record, or the supplemental record can have a reference to the sales order, right? And you can do either one. Of course, the beauty of SQL is that with queries, you can easily get to one or the other, right? It's just how you do the join, you specify it. Usually when you do this, the way you ought to think of it, even though both are valid technically, you should put the pointer on the record that will always be there, right? So typically you put it on the sales order, and then it might have a reference on that, because the sales order will always be there. That's usually done, but it doesn't harm. Now, what I'll get into a bit deeper in a second is, as soon as you do this in a database, what you really created in the database is a one-to-many relationship, even though you think of it as a one-to-one. Because let's say that on a sales order you have a pointer to a record. Well, a bunch of different sales orders can all point to that record, and therefore in the database it's really a one-to-many relationship, right? And that part should at least be clear in your mind, that in SQL you have created a traditional one-to-many relationship, right? Where now it gets trickier, this is the part that was really at the heart of this, is the many-to-many relationship, right? The many clubs, many clubs, many people. Let's back up for a second and say that you want to create just a one-to-many relationship. So let's just say, hypothetically, you have, people records and you have, toddler records. That doesn't make any sense, but you could, on the person record, have a multi-select field of toddlers and then select them all, right? And that is one way that NetSuite allows you to create that kind of relationship. In SQL, there's really no such thing. The way pure SQL would create that is that on the toddler, you would put a pointer to the parent. And so it is a traditional single select just going in the other direction. And that is the better way of doing it, the more correct way of doing it. The only time you should use a multi-select field, really in a pure sense, is when you want a many-to-many relationship, right? Now, the parent-toddler is not a many-to-many, right? A toddler doesn't have many parents. A parent has many toddlers. So you should not create a multi-select field, even though that is a way that NetSuite lets you do it. And part of the reason that they did that, I think, is because they only had same search technology, and so this allowed them to make certain things easy for you that traditionally are an abomination, right? If you're writing SQL and you're a developer, you'd never do something like that, right?
Well, following your logic, why not have the select field on both sides to do the many-to-many?
Okay, so let's say, for example, you have spouses, right? You have a table of people, and then this is actually a good point. You could have a spouse select field on a person, and the husband could point to the wife, and the wife could point to the husband. Perfectly legitimate. The beauty, and again, with synced searches, that was more important. With SQL, you don't need that because the query is so easy depending on how you join it. Select person, and then select the spouse field, or select the person in a subquery whose spouse field points back to me, right? Either one of them will get that to you, and SQL is so efficient that you don't need that, right?
You introduce risk if you do two multi-select, because what if
Exactly.
you have an error in the lineage?
So that would be kind of, in a sense, a violation of the normal forms of databases. Without getting geeking out on that, right? There are certain rules the way databases are built, so that theoretically you can never violate things. Like, for example, you should never, in SQL, you traditionally never store totals of a bunch of other records. Because if the total is wrong, then what's the correct answer? The total or the individual records? So you only get totals by summing up the actual, right? And so to your example, you have one pointer in one way. Because if they point to different people, then what the hell is this, right? So again, NetSuite will let you do it, but it's not the right way of doing it, and you should think about that as you design this, okay? Now, whenever you have, let's say that I were building a SQL system from scratch, and I wanted to create a many-to-many relationship, like let's say people and clothes. The way SQL is designed to do it is you create a simple table with just two columns. Person ID, club ID, right? That's what you would do. Those would be your columns. Person ID points to a person, club ID points to a. Because when you have that, you can have many-to-many. The same person could show up a bunch of times with pointers to different clubs.
But you created a new table, is that?
That's right.
It's
I
a
have to
linear
create.
table.
This
Well,
is
it's like a map.
It's
Yeah.
an intermediary, right?
If I were building SQL directly, when I was writing the e-commerce system and I wrote all my own SQL, I had direct access to do that. That's what I create. This is in NetSuite called an associative table. And it is the only and the correct way of building a many-to-many relationship, right? Now, you could then have additional columns. Like, for example, let's say you think conceptually of NetSuite of contacts. Company ID, contact ID, role, right? So in this relationship, the contact has a role of salesperson. But here, the contact pointing to a different company has a relationship of, whatever, and so on. So these are all, but these are the two key fields, and each combination can only exist once, right? Me, this company again makes no sense. So I only use, unless of course there again you wanted me to have different roles to the same company. Yeah, that's getting too complicated. But I just want you to understand that concept. The moment you create a multi-select field, NetSuite creates this field. Okay. This is your map 1, map 2. If I were writing the SQL from scratch, I would name them appropriately. And in fact, if you look at the master catalog of SQL tables, you will see many of these. client to contact, 2 columns, right? And the fields have meaningful names. But they wanted to make it convenient. Of course, originally they weren't thinking that they would ever let you have SQL access, so they create these tables behind the scenes, and they call it map, table name, column name. And the 2 fields are map 1 and map 2. And that's what's happening behind the scenes. Every multi-select field. So you think of it, let's say, as a one-to-many. I need to select multiple things from here. But NetSuite creates a many-to-many for you. So again, you wanna think carefully about when it makes sense. Many, I would say, very often we create this when what we want is really a one-to-many relationship. Don't create this if you want a one-to-many relationship. And again, think about that. You may not be used to thinking about the world in terms of many-to-many or one-to-many, but do think about it. Can a person have many children? Can a child have many parents? No, it's a one-to-many. Don't create a multi-select on the parent record to point to their children. Again, with saved searches, there was a reason to do that. But with SQL now, there is no reason, and it just makes things
Would
complicated.
you say this is very much separating what you think the flow? I'm just trying to repeat back, but in a different way. How do you get there? How did you decide to do it? I think for me, it's you start thinking what it looks like on the screen in the windows. You now won't end up with. You really need to think, like he's saying, is the definition of it. Is there one of these for many of these?
Exactly.
As
Think
soon as
about
you start
the
to think about the UI separated,
Yeah,
the
forget
view
the
and
UI.
the data are
Think
two
about the
different
real world.
things.
Can this thing have many of these? Can that thing have many of those? Only then you create a multi-select field. Otherwise, you just make the world more complicated, right? Create the simplest thing that models. You want SQL to model the real world. It's when it's most efficient for everything. So, and it doesn't matter, if you call one parent and one child, it doesn't matter. The question is only what is the relationship between these things and these things. And so, all of this to say that the multi-select field, it was a very convenient way for them to solve the saved search problem, but in the SQL world, it's all wrong in many of the cases. People often create that when they don't need that. They just need to create the parent from one to the other.
Okay.
Yes.
So instead, you would prefer that we would create a separate record and make it a sublist on that?
Well, or again, so let's say you had a table of people and a table of children. You would just on the child create a pointer to the parent, and now the parent can have many children. That's it.
The child also has many parents.
Well,
so
that is a multi-select.
Okay.
Then your only option is to create a multi-select field. There is no other way of doing it.
Unless you create yourself a new table, but that's overkill if you can
Yes.
just do a multi.
And then you need developers to do it. It becomes very complicated to maintain. Absolutely. You could create your own table like this, right? And there are some times it just almost always you're going to end up needing programmers then to get involved to properly help you populate and maintain this and manage it. So otherwise you'll end up with duplicate rows. If users themselves can pick these things in a custom table, they'll end up creating duplicates. And I have done this, but I, through script, tightly controlled that no violations can ever occur. Otherwise you get a mess and the data's crap, right? Because people had put the same contact in the same, whatever else 5 times in a row. So you have to be careful. There may be good reasons to do it. But for you, if you're just doing it, create, if it's a many-to-many, then you create a multi-select. Otherwise, do not ever use a multi-select. It works, but it was designed for a previous time, and it just creates complexities that are, not good. So that's what I really wanted to get at.
So, but then what if a client already put it? Then you have to deal with the whole query of, because I thought maybe you go
Yes.
to, now you have to deal map 1, map 2. How do they name it? Because I've
Okay.
done the map 1, map 2.
Yes, very easy. So
Yeah.
let's just say that I'm
already
building
created.
that. So let's say I have a company or customer or whatever, and we have contacts, right? If the customer has a multi-select of contacts, right? Let's just say that. and that field is called, XXX. Then the table will always be called map, then the name of where this field exists, on what record. So customer,
Where that name comes from.
and then the name of the field on that record.
Okay.
So XXX.
So that's how we find that.
That's the table always. And map 1 always points to this table, the customer table. Map 1 will always have the ID of this, and map 2 will always have the ID of the contact in this case. It's always the rule. Very straightforward. Although with these names all customized and so on, it's very easy to get confused. But that's the rule. And again, they just call it map 1 and map 2 because they couldn't create one for every single example of you. By doing this, they have one table with 4 trillion rows, and they just filter down.
You see that in the record catalog? That's map 1, map 2?
You don't see this header. In fact, even if you look at the record catalog, they won't show you that. It's just
It exists though, like
Yeah.
if there's a multi-select and you go into query,
Yeah,
you
you'll-
can
Yeah.
pull that table.
You can find it in the record, just in the join help text.
Really?
That's the only
Oh,
place
well,
you see
Well,
it.
I'm sorry, what drawing?
So when you're
record
looking
catalog?
at, so we were looking at today, because I didn't know that it's naming standard, but I knew our custom record, and I knew
Right.
what it was related to. So I go to the custom record, I find the field that represents sort of the join,
Right.
and then there's a little I
Oh,
circle,
okay.
and you click on it, and it shows you column, table.column equals table.column, but in the case of a map, you get 2 sets.
Oh, okay.
So I take that and I just copy it into the PL SQL query,
Yeah.
and then I'm like,
Okay.
which one's map 1, which map,
Right.
and I can start to put it
Where
together.
where was that exactly? On the-
There's, do you ever use the records catalog where you go to
Yeah,
set
yeah.
up records
That's where it is.
catalog?
Okay, that's
So you-
where it is.
so-
Enjoy.
So,
Yeah.
because it really.
Yeah.
And
But again,
it confused
this is
me
the
for a
rule,
long
and
time.
once you memorize it, it's
Yeah.
very easy. Right?
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
no
And
That's
guesswork.
what I
there
didn't
is
know
a Prolecto blog article that explains
Yes,
this,
yes.
and I've pulled it up so many times.
times.
I feel like,
Yeah.
dang it, what's that thing called?
Exactly. But yeah, I mean, once you do it a couple times, it's not hard to remember. Like
Yeah, yeah,
map,
yeah, yeah.
table name,
But
field
the
name.
idea is just to create that table in the first place and then to just know how to query.
Right.
Well,
But-
yeah,
but
but
sometimes you might
see,
not have a
I
choice.
wouldn't recommend
Yeah.
you guys doing this. The reason being is because one of the things that they ensure is that you don't have duplicates, right? If you create it yourself, you can end up with duplicates, and now you have non-norm. Now you have potentially bad data. It's like we said, where one spouse points to this, but that person's spouse points to somebody else. You have data that is meaningless. So I would not do this without a developer involved, adding logic to ensure that you don't violate.
Yeah,
Unless it's like super simple.
Yeah, just, I mean, if it's a multi to multi, just create a multi-select field, right?
Yeah.
It's not hard to query, right? It's an extra line of join, whatever, to do it. And once you know the rule, it's really not complicated. If you're comfortable writing queries and joins, it's not that big a deal when you know the rules, right? So I want to know if this customer has this contact, say, where exists, select X from this table, where map 1 equals this, and map 2 is this. And if that exists, I know that there's a relationship between them. If it doesn't exist, so on. So it's anyway, that's the heart of what I wanted to get to about the multi-select fields and how to create these things.
Only when you absolutely need it.
Well, when you need multi-select, you need multi-select. There's no getting around it. Yeah.
Or
And
if
you
the
don't
client,
need it
or if the client already has it,
can
and
have it.
you
Yeah,
need
that's
to
what I have to
use
train
it,
the client
or
to
the
use the
client
custom
already put
records
one
that are
in,
multi-select.
so you're not gonna be like,
Good
oh,
luck.
change
Yeah,
it.
but
think-
it's more important for us. Right? You're doing it. Don't do it wrong.
If you're using a multi-select, just
No, I
maybe
think I
take
need
an
to, like,
extra minute to look and say,
print
let me redefine this, really look at my definitions.
No, I can do
Forget
it.
about what it
Can you
looks
do it?
like on the screen.
Is that?
And
Yeah.
just
But-
ask yourself,
Do
is
you have
this
it?
really,
Yeah. Can you do
is
it?
it really,
Can you
are they
test yourself?
multi-multi,
Can
or
you
am
do
I
it?
creating it for, that's
Yeah,
all.
people
It's all
often
about-
create a multi-select
You know-
when what they really
When you
want is
know
on the
about
child, a
this
parent to the parent, a point to the parent, because it's a one-to-many.
Well, I-
Yeah.
But they
I
think
wouldn't
of this as
provide
one-to-many.
that.
Oh, I have a customer and I'm gonna select a bunch of contacts, that's a one-to-many.
But yeah,
No,
it's-
that's a many to
Just
many.
But the minute you have more than one parent, because it happens, right? sometimes you have more than one parent.
No,
That-
then from the parent, put a pointer to the child.
But it could have more than one child. There are some
Yes.
true many-to-many
Many to
relationships.
many.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yes.
Once we are in the many-to-many context,
Then it's about
is there a
business.
standard practice to either put the link on the child to the parents or to the parents to the child?
It makes no difference.
Makes no
From
difference.
a database perspective.
So
It's
it-
more of maybe a logical
exactly.
how people will think of it, so,
Exactly. Okay.
but it makes no
Because
difference.
there are some true many-to-many, and that's what I was trying to get.
Absolutely.
From parent to child or from child to parent doesn't really
Absolutely.
matter.
I just want people to understand when it's right and
Yeah.
when it's wrong.
Got it.
Okay.
Thank you, Boban. But then when you're stuck with a client who does it, how do
Well,
you find
I mean,
it?
You have what you have, right? But
Yeah.
you don't want to exacerbate.
You
the
don't want to
problem.
exacerbate the
Because
problem.
we